Right now, in the back of nearly 400 restaurants scattered across America, something is happening that the entire chain restaurant industry spent the last 40 years and a fortune in consulting fees trying to make impossible. Somebody is cooking, not reheating, not assembling, not tearing open a vacuum-sealed bag that arrived frozen on a truck from a plant 3 states away, actually cooking, from raw ingredients, made to order, off a menu more than 250 dishes long, 250. In that building, that day, most of them from scratch, in a kitchen that starts its prep before the sun is up and doesn't stop until close. And I want you to sit with how insane that is by the standards of the business it lives in, because the whole modern chain restaurant model was engineered, deliberately, expensively, to never do that. The plan was to shrink the menu, freeze the food, ship it from a central factory, and turn the kitchen into a microwave with a logo over the door cooking that's cheap and fast and identical and needs nobody who actually knows how to cook. That's the winning playbook. It built the largest restaurant companies on earth, and there is one chain, 46 years old this year, that looked at every line of that playbook and did the exact opposite, deliberately, in every store it runs, and just posted the best numbers in its history. Because in 2026, for the first time ever, the Cheesecake Factory booked more than $1 billion in revenue in a single quarter. Record sales for the full year before that, north of $3.5 billion, with 25 new restaurants opened into the teeth of the worst casual dining collapse in a generation. Its stock roughly doubled over the year. Its founder crossed $300 million in personal net worth this past July, and its foot traffic, actual human beings walking through the door, was, in the company's own words, meaningfully outperforming an industry where its neighbors were filing for bankruptcy by the dozen. So today I want to talk about the Cheesecake Factory, and about the strange, almost reckless-looking idea at the center of it that a company got rich by being complicated on purpose. In a business where the smart money spent 2 generations proving that complicated is how you die. So let's pull the receipt on the Cheesecake Factory. Over the next half hour, I'll show you 3 things. First, what this company actually does back there. The real machine behind that ridiculous menu, which is nothing like what you think it is. Second, why almost no competitor on earth can copy it, even after watching it work in plain sight for 40 years. And at the end, a single rule about complexity, about the gap between a company that does a hard thing for real and one that only wears the look of it that will change how you read every menu, every store, and every business you walk into for the rest of your life. To understand what the Cheesecake Factory pulled off, you have to understand the graveyard it's standing in. Casual dining, the sit-down chains, the host stand and the laminated menu, and the booth your family piled into after a soccer game, has been dying for years, and 2024 was a massacre. In that single year, 21 of the country's restaurant and bar chains collapsed into bankruptcy court, places that felt like fixtures. Booths a whole generation grew up in, and most of them didn't die of bad luck or of people cooking more at home. They died because financial engineers bought them, loaded them with debt, and ran them on the cheapest possible version of a kitchen, until the food was a sad photocopy of itself, and the customers quietly stopped coming. That's the water the Cheesecake Factory swims in, the tide going out. And in the middle of it, this chain is posting record revenue and rising traffic while running the single most operationally complicated kitchen in the category. Not despite the complication, because of it. Now, I have a confession that tells you exactly why this story got its hooks in me. A few years ago, I decided I'd cook the entire holiday dinner myself. The whole thing, turkey, 4 sides, gravy that didn't come from a jar, all landing hot on the table at the same moment. I'm an organized man. I go to the grocery store with a list written out by hand, and going off that list feels like losing a small battle. So I figured I had this. I did not have this. What I learned, standing in a kitchen full of smoke with a cold bird and a burnt side, and a wife who was very kindly not saying anything, is that cooking one hard dish is a skill, but cooking 12 so they all arrive right, at the same time, hot, every time, that is not a skill. That is coordination, and it is brutally hard, and it's the reason most kitchens that try to do a lot of things end up doing all of them badly, which is what makes this company so quietly outrageous. The Cheesecake Factory doesn't run my kitchen once a year and get lucky. It runs a 250-dish version of my disaster, to order, all night, in every store, and gets it right. The man who built the thing understood cooking from the ground up because he grew up inside it. David Overton's mother, Evelyn, had a cheesecake recipe good enough that she and her husband started a wholesale bakery around it back in 1972, supplying restaurants in Los Angeles. In 1978, David opened the first actual Cheesecake Factory restaurant in Beverly Hills, built around his mother's cheesecakes and a menu of maybe 60 dishes. He is still, decades later, the chairman and chief executive, which is going to matter a great deal when we get to why nobody can copy this. That menu of 60 has grown into today's beast of 250, and along the way the industry decided, with near total consensus, that a menu that big was a confession, a kitchen with no discipline, freezing and reheating everything because it had lost the plot. Almost everywhere that's true. Here's the part that isn't. The easy answer, and why it's backwards. Because the answer almost everyone reaches for, the one that feels smart to say at the table, is that the Cheesecake Factory is exactly that. A bloated 20-page menu of oversized, frozen, and microwaved sameness. A place that wins on portion size and sugar rather than on anything happening in the kitchen. It's a satisfying answer. It lets you feel superior to the parking lot full of people waiting for a table. And it's wrong. Not slightly, but backwards. Because here that enormous menu is not the red flag it would be almost anywhere else. It's the output of one of the most disciplined operating machines in American food. So hard to build and to run that its own competitors, watching it succeed for 40 years, still can't bring themselves to copy it. It's not a big menu, it's a factory that refuses to cheat. And the size that looks like a warning sign is the evidence, because you cannot fake 250 scratch dishes. You either have the machine that makes it possible, or your kitchen collapses trying. I told you once, on this channel, that a very short menu is usually a good sign, that a place offering 6 things is often the one actually cooking, and a place offering 50 is usually reheating most of them. That's the ordinary rule, and the Cheesecake Factory is the rare exception that proves it. The kitchen that offers you 250 things and is, astonishingly, still cooking. There are only 2 honest ways to run a restaurant. Do a few things for real, or build a machine disciplined enough to do many things for real. Everything in between, a big menu run cheap, is the graveyard. This company lives at the far, hard end of the second road, the end almost nobody can reach. So let me show you the machine, because the machine is the whole story, and it has 3 moving parts most people who eat there never see. The first is the thing that should be impossible, the ingredients. A menu of 250 dishes sounds like it would need an infinite pantry and a warehouse of spoiling produce out back. It doesn't, and the reason is the single cleverest thing about the whole operation. The menu is engineered so that a few hundred ingredients, by most accounts around 700, overlap across all those dishes. The same base sauces, the same proteins, the same produce, recombined in different arrangements to throw off enormous apparent variety out of a controlled, manageable set of raw materials. That's not the accident of a menu that grew by adding whatever sounded good. That's design, variety on the plate without chaos in the walk-in. The customer sees 250 choices. The kitchen sees a deep, overlapping set of components it has mastered. The menu is a magic trick, and the overlap is how the trick is done. The second part is time. If you tried to cook 250 things to order during a Friday rush, starting from raw, you'd recreate my holiday disaster at industrial scale, every night. So they don't. The Cheesecake Factory front loads. Prep starts around 6 in the morning, hours before a single customer sits down, chopping, portioning, and making in-house somewhere around 160 different sauces and dressings from scratch that day. By the time the rush hits, the hardest, slowest work is done, and the line is doing final cooking and assembly on a foundation laid before dawn. That's the difference between a kitchen that handles volume and one that drowns in it. The complexity didn't get removed, it got moved to an hour of the day when it can be done with care instead of panic. And the third part is the discipline to stop. This is the one that separates the machine from a mess. The company changes its menu roughly twice a year, adding and cutting something like 10 to 20 odd dishes each time, so it stays fresh and gives you a reason to come back. But it never lets the menu run away from it. Leadership has said, out loud, that the menu isn't going to keep growing much, and given a reason that tells you they understand exactly what they've built: operational complexity. They know it could get bigger. They also know that past a certain point, bigger stops being a moat and becomes the swamp that kills everyone else. So they hold the line, a company that grows by adding, and understands there's a ceiling on how much it can add and still do all of it for real, and chooses to respect that ceiling. That is a rare and disciplined animal. Undisciplined complexity is how restaurants die. Disciplined complexity, held right at the edge of what the machine can honestly deliver, is the moat. Now, here's where it gets expensive, in the most literal sense of the word. Every piece of the machine I just walked you through is a line item the rest of the industry erased years ago to survive. Cooking 250 dishes from scratch means more cooks, more skill, more training, more prep hours before dawn, more square footage of kitchen pulled off the dining floor, more waste, more ways for a shift to go wrong on a busy night. The 700-ingredient pantry and the 160 house-made sauces are a supply chain and a payroll that a frozen and reheated rival simply doesn't carry. Line it all up, and you've got a company that chose to run the most costly, most complicated kitchen in its entire category, of its own free will, and is beating the cheaper, simpler chains around it on the very numbers those chains stripped out all that complexity to win. Which leaves the only question worth asking: how is that even possible? And why on earth does nobody else do it? Let me put the actual decisions in front of you, because each one is a standard industry move flipped on its head, and you only see the shape of the strategy once they're lined up next to each other. First, they cook it on site. The single biggest lever any chain has to cut cost is to pull the cooking out of the restaurant and into a central commissary. Do the hard part once, far away, at scale, and truck the results to hundreds of restaurants that only reheat. The Cheesecake Factory refused that lever. The dishes become dishes inside the four walls you're sitting in, and that one decision drags along everything expensive that follows: cooks, prep hours, kitchen space, training. Second, they engineered the complexity to be survivable instead of just piling it on. This is the part people miss. Anyone can print a huge menu. The graveyard is full of chains that tried. What this company built was the scaffolding underneath, the overlapping ingredients, the before-dawn prep, the recipes and training refined over 4+ decades. That turns 250 dishes from a suicide note into a working operation. The menu isn't the achievement, the machine behind it is, and it's invisible from your booth. Third, they hold the menu at the edge and refuse to let it run wild, changing it to keep it interesting, but capping it before it outgrows what the kitchen can honestly deliver. Growth by addition, bounded by an honest read of its own limits. That restraint isn't weakness. It's what keeps the machine from tipping into the swamp that swallowed everyone else. And here's the detail I love most, because it's where the discipline shows its face. The one thing the Cheesecake Factory does not make in its restaurants is the cheesecake. The dessert the entire company is named after, 30-some varieties of it, is baked at 2 central bakeries, one in California and one in North Carolina, and shipped to the stores. And this is not a gotcha. It's the proof of the discipline. A baked dessert that has to be perfectly consistent across 400 restaurants and that ships and holds beautifully, is exactly the one thing where centralizing makes sense. So that's the one thing they centralize, and they refuse to let it creep into anything else. Most chains centralize everything and cook nothing. This one centralizes the single item that should be, and cooks the rest. That's not a loophole in the discipline, that is the discipline. Why almost nobody can copy this? Here's the question that should be nagging at you. If this works, if the complicated kitchen produces record traffic and a wait for a table while the simple cheap kitchens go under, why doesn't every struggling chain just do it? Add the cooks, expand the menu, make the sauces from scratch, turn itself around? And the answer is the same structural bind we hit over and over on this channel. What would rescue these chains is the exact thing their model can't stomach, because you cannot bolt this on. Disciplined complexity isn't a program you launch next quarter. It's 46 years of accumulated operational scaffolding, the ingredient overlap, the prep timing, the recipes, the supplier relationships, the muscle memory of thousands of cooks, and none of it installs on a turnaround consultant's deadline. A chain that tried to slap 200 dishes onto its menu tomorrow wouldn't get a moat. It would get my holiday dinner, every night, in every store, blown tickets, spoiled inventory, a payroll that screams off the page, and its owners would panic and cut the menu back inside a year. And here's the deeper trap. The entire reflex of the modern restaurant business points the other way. Cut the items, shrink the menu, centralize the kitchen, strip out the skill. So even the companies with the money to attempt this machine are run by people whose every instinct pulls toward the swamp's cheaper edge. The complexity is a moat precisely because it's costly, slow to build, and looks unhinged on a spreadsheet guarded by the very people who'd most like to steal it and can't make themselves try. Now, on this channel, the usual explanation for how the rare good one gets away with it is ownership, a family in charge instead of the market. Not this time, and I'll be straight about it, because the Cheesecake Factory trades on the open market. There's a ticker, earnings calls, analysts, all the 90-day pressure that comes with them. So the shield here isn't private ownership. The shield is age. This whole organism grew up long before the stock ever did. Overton started building the from-scratch kitchen and the sprawling menu out of his mother's bakery in 1972, and he's still, decades later, the man in the chief executive's chair. To the market, the complicated kitchen has never been some new expense management has to defend on a conference call. It's the entire reason anyone wanted a piece of the company to begin with. And the tables are full enough, night after night, that all that costly cooking more than earns its keep. There's no version of this you buy off a shelf and switch on. You either spent almost half a century becoming it, founder still steering, or you didn't, and the ones who didn't are filling the graveyard. There's a company we've looked at here that is the perfect mirror of this one. In-N-Out got great by running to the opposite extreme, a menu you can recite from memory, 4 things done perfectly, the whole business built on the discipline of subtraction. The Cheesecake Factory built its moat out of the discipline of addition, opposite ends of the same rare street, and I'll come back to what they share. I'll be frank with you, the tidy version of tonight, one honest kitchen surrounded by frauds, presided over by a kindly old founder, is precisely the kind of story I've taught myself to distrust. So let me muddy it the way any fair accounting has to. Start with what I already told you. The cheesecake, the company's namesake, is not made in the store, and while I've read that as discipline, you should keep both meanings in your head. This is a large, publicly traded, for-profit corporation, and its founder became a $300 million man off these choices. Every record figure I gave you is one a company is delighted to own, and none of it is charity. The complicated kitchen is real, but it's a business decision that prints money, not a moral crusade, and I'd be lying to leave you thinking otherwise. The people who mopped the floor. Here's the part that gets buried under all the record sales, so let me stop and say it plainly, because it's about the people who actually run that machine. A kitchen this complicated runs on a lot of labor, And the honest version of this story has to include how that labor gets treated when the lawyers get involved. In Washington state, workers brought a case alleging the company left the required pay ranges off its job postings, a transparency law meant to protect people applying for work, and the Cheesecake Factory agreed to settle for something like $1.25 million without admitting wrongdoing. That's a settlement, not a verdict, and I'll hold that line carefully. But the one that stays with me is the janitors. Around 589 people who cleaned a group of Cheesecake Factory restaurants across 8 stores in Southern California were employed through an outside contractor, and that contractor was accused of underpaying their overtime. Under a California law that makes a company jointly responsible for its contractors' wage violations, the Cheesecake Factory was on the hook, and it agreed to pay about $1 million to settle. And here is the detail that should sit in your chest for a second. Something like $700,000 of that money reportedly could not be handed out because more than 500 of the workers it was owed to could not be found. Think about what that tells you. These were people so far down the ladder, so invisible to the machine they cleaned up after, that when a settlement finally arrived with their name on it, no one knew where they'd gone. The kitchen we're admiring is genuinely a marvel. The floor under it was mopped by people the system lost track of entirely. Both are true, and a story that tells you only the first is a commercial, not an accounting. So here's your move, and it carries well past one restaurant, because what you're really after is a way to size up any business by a single question. Is its complexity earned, or is it faked? Once you can see that line, almost everything comes into focus. First, learn to tell a long menu that's a machine from a long menu that's a warning. They look identical on the laminated page, and the tell is not the number of items, it's whether the place can actually cook. Is there real prep, real skill, real time going into the food, or has a giant menu been made possible by freezing and reheating every line of it? The Cheesecake Factory's 250 dishes are the rare, honest version. Most 20-page menus are the swamp. Look past the length to whether anyone back there is genuinely cooking. Second, watch where a company chooses to standardize, because the smart ones centralize exactly one thing, and the lazy ones centralize everything. When you find a business that has thought that hard about the one corner it's willing to cut and refuses to cut the rest, you've found a disciplined operation. When you find one that centralized and froze and outsourced the whole thing, you've found an empty shell where a kitchen used to be. Third, and here's the meta rule that ties it together, the one for the index card the size of the menu tells you nothing. Whether the kitchen is cheating tells you everything. A short menu can be honest or a shortcut. A huge menu can be a machine or a microwave. Stop reading the length of the list and start reading whether the hard thing is actually being done. Anybody can look complicated. Anybody can look simple. The only question worth asking is whether, behind the size of the operation, the company is doing the difficult work for real or just wearing a costume of it. My mother, who is past 70 and reads a menu the way some people read a contract, worked this out years before I did. She doesn't ask how many things a place makes. She asks whether it tastes like anybody made it. That's the whole test. The bigger pattern. Step back a moment, because none of this was ever really just about a restaurant. What you're watching, in the contrast between the Cheesecake Factory thriving and the casual dining graveyard filling up around it, is a fight between two completely different theories of how to run anything, and it maps onto far more than food. One theory says, strip it down, simplify, centralize, hollow out the expertise, make everything cheap and interchangeable and shippable, compete on price. That's the theory that gutted most of casual dining, and the same one humming behind the self-checkout kiosk and the offshored helpline, and every operation that decided the people who knew the work were an expense to trim to nothing. The other theory says, master something genuinely hard, whether that's the radical simplicity of In-N-Out's 4 perfect items, or the disciplined complexity of the Cheesecake Factory's 250, and let the difficulty itself be the wall no competitor can climb. The businesses that last almost all live at one end or the other of that second theory. They earned the right to be simple, or they earned the right to be complicated. What kills companies is the mushy middle, the long menu run cheap, the wide operation done fake, the look of ambition with none of the discipline that makes it survivable. The Cheesecake Factory isn't remarkable because it's big. It's remarkable because it's big and real, in an industry that decided those two things couldn't go together, and spent 40 years being proven wrong by a place people mostly remember for the cheesecake. As always, one rule, and it fits on an index card. Most companies simplify because they cannot afford to be genuinely good at many things at once, which means a long list of anything, dishes, products, promises, is usually a confession that each item on it is a little worse. The rare company earns the right to be complicated by building the discipline to do all of it for real. So don't be impressed by how much a business offers you, and don't be impressed by how little either. Ask the only question that matters. Is the hard part actually being done, or has it been quietly deleted and dressed up to look like it's still there? A company that genuinely does the hard thing is showing you something no slogan can counterfeit. A company faking it is showing you something too. Learn to hear the difference, and you'll never again mistake a big menu for a good kitchen, or a cheap one for an honest deal. Which brings me to next week, and to a business that runs tonight's story backwards. One that spends real money convincing you it does the hard, honest, homemade thing while doing the precise opposite behind the counter. Tonight was a company more or less telling you the truth about what it cooks. Next week we step inside a grocery store built on a lie about who it even is. Picture the friendly hometown market, the family's name still lettered above the door, a sign over the bread that promises it was baked fresh right there in the store's own ovens, hung over loaves that showed up frozen on a truck from a bakery 1,000 miles off. That warm local voice on the radio spots? A hired actor. The family sold out years back, and the deed to every location now belongs to a fund that bought the whole chain with borrowed money and then bolted that debt onto the stores themselves. A debt you help retire a few cents at a time each time you shop, in prices that quietly crept up past the giant national chains you always assumed were the pricey ones. Tonight was a kitchen that refuses to cheat. Next week is a storefront that is nothing but the cheat, wearing the costume of a family that walked away a decade ago. Before you go, one for the comments, because that's where half of these episodes are born. What's a place near you that looks complicated and impressive, but tastes like nobody back there is actually cooking? And the flip side, the little joint with the enormous menu that somehow makes every single thing on it for real. Tell me both. I read every one. And if tonight changed how you see a 20-page menu, subscribe. Once a week I pull one more piece of the everyday economy apart on this channel. A store, a brand, an industry you thought you had figured out, and lay the mechanism on the table where you can finally see it. I'm Frank. Keep your receipts.